How is everything? I hope everything is right. And now, today I'll be talking about, or I'm going to continue from where I stopped in my first live stream, where I talked about baking as science. And today I'm going to continue, or I'm going to elaborate more on it. I'm going to talk more on it. First, if you're just getting to know me, if you're listening, I am Susan. I'm the host behind Susie's Cakes Recipes on YouTube. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe, hit the notification bell to be notified of all my simple recipes that I bring live every week. Now, for today's special live stream, I'm going deeper, or should I call it, I'm going to be discussing one item at a time. I'm going to be pitching my tent to one item at a time. Now, to understand baking as science, you need to first of all understand the heat aspect of baking. Yes, the heat aspect of baking, you need to understand that, because this plays a significant role on your baked treats. You might have come across recipes that will tell you bake at, let's say, 180 degrees Celsius, or fry at medium or low heat. Yes, we have come across such recipes. This is just what this has to do. This shows that your baked treats, or your fried treats, or your treats in general can also be affected. The atmosphere in your kitchen or your bakery might be very good, but what about the heat level? This also has an effect on whatever you are baking. That's why this is an important aspect of baking as a science. And like I said, one of the basic aspects of accepting baking as science is understanding how heat applies to your treats, and how the application of heat can change it. Now we have the wet heat, we have the dry heat. For wet heat could be boiling, could be frying, and could be steaming. These are some examples of wet heat. While your dry heat could be baking and could be grilling. Now let's take two products, or two treats for instance. Let's take bread and let's take donuts. Now if you look at bread, if you look at bread, bread bread and donuts have almost the same item. That is, their ingredients are almost similar. The mixing method is even similar. And yes, the mixing method is almost similar. But let's talk about the preparation. That is where sometimes you might have differences. But for bread and for donuts, you have to mix them to have for the dough to be strong and stretchy. That is for both mixing method. The dough has to be strong and the dough has to be stretchy. Now, when we want to bring these two items in contact with heat, for instance, bread. For bread, you're using the dry method. I'm talking about the traditional way of making bread. I'm not talking about quick bread like banana breads and the like. I'm talking about the traditional way of making bread. You have to bring it dry heat, baking. Now, when you bake this bread, why for donuts? You are going with the traditional method of frying. That's the wet method. These are two products that have 90% similarities, but by the time they go through different heat process or heat type, they produce different results. So this is the basic way of making you understand that heat has a great effect when it comes to your baked item. And when you're treating baking as science, you must consider the heat of your baked item, the heat of a baked item. So that's what I mean by understanding the heat of a baked item. Now, I will pitching my tent to baking as a science, covering ingredients, the ingredients you use in baking. And that this is what some of you have been waiting for. This is what you wanted to hear. Yes, I'll be covering baking ingredients and the common baking ingredients we have. I'm starting with flour. Flour is like the basic most common ingredients we use in our treats. Now, I'm not just saying baked treats, because obviously it might not always be baking. You can be grilling, you can be frying, you can be steaming. So I'm talking about treats in general, from cakes to pastries to shops to any appetizers, any appetizers. Talking about them in general as in treats. treats. Now, flour provides a basic structure for everything. It is made up of starch and it's made up of protein. Now, the protein aspect of flour is what we call gluten. Once I've seen in my some of my recent recipes where I talk about gluten level, gluten level, gluten level. I'm just talking about the protein level in your flour. That is why different recipes calls for different flour types. Yes. So like I said, flour contains both protein and 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 starch. Now when you combine these two together, when you use flour in the right proportion or in the right ratio, when you use in the right ratio, it's going to tell on the final look or the final result of your product. That's the reason why I mentioned right ratio in the right proportion. If you if you have a good recipe, for instance, and then you decide that the recipe is calling for half cup of flour, and you measured half cup of flour, but instead of you spooning your flour into your cup, you use your measuring cup to dish that flour. You have actually accumulated more flour, like you've compressed more flour. So whenever your recipe calls for something like half cup of flour, 1 cup of flour, it's better you use another item, another, let's say, another equipment rather, like a spoon or a bowl to dish that flour and pour it to your measuring cup, not using your measuring cup to dish, because when you do that, they are compressing the flour, and by the time somebody else measures half cup of flour, it's going to be different from your own measurement. This is the reason why you have to know the right proportion of your flour. You have to weigh it properly. So some recipes also tell you to measure your flour. I prefer measure it using the scale. That's what I prefer because it gives you an accurate measurement and when you use cups or when you use spoons. Now, like I said, when flour is used in the proper ratio to other ingredients, it produces gluten, it produces protein that forms a strong but elastic bond, what I call a gluten network. If it's used in the right proportion, it forms a strong and forms an elastic bond. This gluten is able to stretch a great deal. Let me use bubble gum for instance. When you're chewing bubble gum, you will discover that by the time you blow air into the bubble gum, it's going to have this elastic texture and it's going to hold its shape. That is just what happens when you mix the right proportion of flour. You mix the right proportion of flour with other ingredients. That is just what happens. It's like you blowing in air. You blow air into your flour, and then it's it kind of have this elastic texture, and it hold its shape. It hold the shape. That is just what this flour, starch, protein. That's what the protein does in it. It makes it hold its shape for a particular period of time. Now, the starch in the flour, I said it from the onset that flour has both gluten, that is the protein, and it has the starch. Now, the starch in it starts working when your flour comes in contact with heat. The heat might not just be when it comes in contact with your oven's heat. It might be the atmosphere of your bakery. Yes, it might affect that. Like now, look at when you're working with yeast raised doughs, you keep your yeast raised dough in a warm environment. That warm environment, it's not yet in contact with heat, but that warm environment, that heat that is being produced, is going to have an effect on the dough. So that is what I mean by your flour come in contact with heat too. So that the starch in your flour starts showing its work. And when you mix flour and water together, the protein in the flour combines to form an elastic web, a protein network, a gluten network. Same thing. This is like a gluten network. This web traps hair bubbles. The protein is responsible for trapping the hair bubbles, while the starch is responsible for making that dough become elastic or retain its shape. I hope this is understood. This doesn't sound strange. Now, let me break this down. Let me break this down because you don't want to go to the market and say you're looking for a particular flour that contains protein, that contains so percent of protein or so percent of um of starch. The seller is going to look at you in a very awkward, in a very awkward way. So let me break this down. Now we have different five types of flour. Majorly we have like five types of flour, different types of flour, five types. I'm going to talk about them one after the other. First of all, this is not a paid video. This is not a paid advert. So I'm not trying to preach any brand. I'm not trying to preach any brand. I'm just trying to talk about what I have used over the years, what works for me, what has given me the same result over the years. Yes, yes. So this is not a paid advert. Like I said, there are different types of flour in the market, and I also apologize to my non-Nigerian subscribers because I'm going to be mentioning some brands that might not be peculiar to your own market, but with the knowledge of what I'm going to share, you can use it to look for some specific brand of flour in your own common market. Now, five types of flour. We have the first one, all-purpose flour. If you have come across my written recipes, my my written recipes, or even some of my videos, you'll see where I mention sometimes use all-purpose flour. That is the the regular type of flour you see in the market. You can use it to make any baked item, any treats of your choice, especially if your recipe calls for it. I'm always a fan of follow your recipe to the end. Don't try to tweak your recipe, don't try to add what your recipe doesn't call for, and don't try to remove what your recipe says you should add. So I'm always a fan of follow your recipe. So if your recipe calls for all-purpose flour, don't use other types of flour. Stick to all-purpose. Quite quite bad. That was quite bad. Okay, so um, like I said, we have the all-purpose really wrong. It's going to affect the texture of your treat later, especially not following your recipe. Now, your purpose flour is just regular flour you see in your market. Regular flour you see in your market. Flour is regular flour you can see in your market. You can use it for any of your baked treats. Now, for this all-purpose flour, if you're in the Nigerian market, I'm going to mention some popular brands that I've worked with and that you must have probably seen. We have like the Golden Penny, we have the Honeywell, we have Mama Gold, and we have Dangote. These are the four brands of flour that I have worked with and I am still working with. By the time we go to other types of flour, I'm going to tell you which you are supposed to use for a regular recipe and which you should use for a particular recipe. Now, let's talk about the second type of flour. This is particular to bakers. And if you're in Nigeria, if you're in Nigeria, you might not see the second type of flour. In fact, you might not see the rest four types of flour as easily as you see the all-purpose flour. That is why for we Nigerian bakers or we Nigerian pastry chefs or cake artists or yes, we have we kind of create our own flour, like the next type of flour. The second type of flour is cake flour. This is very good or very perfect for cake. When you're baking your cakes, it's very perfect for cakes. It gives that moist plus fluffy fluffy texture to your baked item, your cake flour. It's very simple to make. If you've followed any of my recipes or watched any of my video, I've shared how to make your own cake flour yourself at the comfort of your home. And the third type of flour, the third major type of flour is your bread flour. Now, like I said, if you are in the Nigerian market, you can't see bread flour. But if you're outside the country, like outside Nigeria, you can walk up to a chef to a mall to the chef and get it. But for we in Nigeria, it's not it really as like accessible to us. So you might not see a bread flour. Make it yourself. And this type of flour is very good for making breads. Like the name implies, bread flour is very good for making breads. It's perfect when you make bread with it. Now, I'm going to say something about the four brands of flour I called. If I am just making cake, my recipe calls for all-purpose flour. I prefer to use Honeywell. This, yes, all-purpose flour, I prefer to use Honeywell. The texture of Honeywell flour for any baked treat is perfect. This is something I've used over the years, and yes, I can say it is perfect. But if I'm making bread or yeast raised doughs, I prefer using Dangote flour, Mama Gold, or Golden Penny. Dangote, Mama Gold, or Golden Penny flour, because these the gluten level are tough. They're perfect for bread. It's not like Honeywell that is a little bit calm. It's a um little bit okay. For these other ones, Golden Penny, Dangote, and Mama Good flour, they are best for making bread. I don't try to use them for cakes. Any yeast raised those, I prefer using them. So this is why I first of all had to apologize to my non-Nigerian subscribers. That was why I had to apologize. They're tough type of flours that are perfect for just bread or yeast raised doughs. So I'm making a regular cake recipe that calls for all-purpose flour, or a regular pastry recipe that calls for all-purpose flour. I prefer to make use of my Honeywell flour. And the next type of flour is what I call seasoned flour. If you are making chops, small chops, or appetizers, you must have been working with seasoned flour. What does seasoned flour means? It just means your regular flour with a spice, with one or two spices mixed with it. That's what seasoned flour is. Your regular flour with one or two spices mixed with it. Now, if you make something like scotch egg, yes, scotch egg, you must have used seasoned flour. That particular flour where you have to roll your scotch egg inside before frying, that is your seasoned flour. Or if you made any other form of appetizer, so you have to coat that appetizer with a flour that you have added, let's say cinnamon, or all mixed spices, or nutmeg, or salt, or black pepper, any of the spices, if you have added it to that flour, that is what's called seasoned flour. So, and the final type of flour is the almond flour. This is particular to when you're making things like macarons or some very specific recipes. Most recipes don't call for it, but these are the major types of flours we have. So with this, I hope you can understand the types of flour we have. Apart from the all-purpose flour, the rest type of flour are something you can do your DIYs with. You can make them yourself. Apart from the all-purpose flour, the other thing is that the other type of flours are something you can work yourself. Your bread flour, your all-purpose, your cake flour, your seasoned flour, and even your almond flour. Once you get almond seed, either the raw or blanched almond seed, it's just to process them with a blender or a food processor, and you have your almond flour. So these are very simple to make. So by the time you understand this, the work of flour, and you understand your recipe, and you understand what you're trying to get at the end of the day, you're able to choose which of the flours you're going to use, which of the flour types you're going to use. So the recipe calls for all-purpose flour. Don't go ahead and use a bread flour. You're going to have a tough product at the end of the day. The recipe calls for bread flour. Don't go ahead and use a cake flour. You're going to have issues at the end of the day. So this is what I meant by baking as a science and looking at the ingredients. So today I think I've been able to cover flour and the types of flour and the brands that I've used. Like I said, this is not a paid advert. This is not a paid review. This is something that has worked for me over the years, and it's something I've taught over the years. So, although the gluten network are helpful in providing structure, providing elasticity, the, the too much of gluten will affect your baked item. That is why I usually say follow your recipe. Follow a recipe, follow it to the end. Too much of your flour and your item is going to affect your baked item. That is why when somebody comes up with me and say, I follow the recipe to the end, but I had issues with so and so, or it didn't look like so and so, I'll ask you, what did the recipe say? Okay, recipe says measure your flour with a cup, 1 cup of flour. How did you measure your flour? And some people will like, just the way we're supposed to measure flour. I say, no, 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 no. It's not just the way we're supposed to measure flour. If your recipe tells you 1 cup of flour, how did you measure that? 1 cup of flour. Because if I'm to measure my own 1 cup of flour, and you have to measure your own 1 cup of flour, you might arrive at different results. And I usually say something, when your recipe gives you an option for working with scale and cups, when you start working with scale, don't switch over and use cup for the next item. It's going to have an effect on your baked treat. This is what has worked for me. This is what I've noticed. So when your recipe calls for cups, or using the scale like in grams or in cups, by the time you measure flour with a cup, let's say a cup of flour, and then you get to butter, and you see that recipe says 1 cup of butter, or let's say 250 grams of butter. I say, oh, I don't want to start washing my cup. Let me quickly use my scale to measure it. It's going to affect the final texture of your baked treat. So baking is science. Don't joke with it. Don't try to twerk it, especially if you're not the recipe creator. And don't try to subtract or add to it. I hope you enjoyed this live stream, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in my next live stream. Thank you so much for your support, and see you next time. Bye.